It's a league within a league.
Boston.
Chicago.
Chicago Stadium, a complete sellout.
Detroit.
Montreal.
New York.
Toronto.
We played each other 14 times a year.
Another fight breaks out.
I once called the original six, I spelled it S-I-C-K-S.
This thing's on. This original six thing is on.
The original six is the foundation that won't go anywhere.
They are the founding fathers of the National Hockey League.
Boston, New York, Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, Chicago.
A constant reminder of heritage and tradition.
Montreal, Toronto, New York, Chicago, Boston, Detroit.
That for 25 years, 1942 through 1967, were the center of hockey's universe.
Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, Boston, New York Rangers.
6 teams, the Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, Boston Bruins, Detroit Red Wings, Chicago Blackhawks, and New York Rangers, that are still held in the highest of regards, not just for their names, but for their history.
You know what it means when you play an Original Six team and you go into an Original Six city.
When you go to Toronto or Montreal, there's always that feeling that like this is a real hockey city. You can definitely feel it. It's pretty cool to think that you get to go up north and play on a hockey night in Canada, and you always kind of relive those memories you had as a kid.
When I was a boy, my dad first took me to Maple Leaf Gardens. All I ever did was watch on black and white television. We went to Maple Leaf Gardens, and you walk up and it was all this color.
And the colors of yesteryear remain as vibrant as ever today. The original 6 jerseys and their iconic logos continue to be celebrated.
In hockey, I think more than any other sport, it's the colors.
The elegance of that Chicago Blackhawk with I think they're orange and green and yellow, the feathers on the Chief Blackhawk there. The Bruins have the hub of the universe thing, the winged wheel.
I'd never played an Original Six. The Detroit Red Wing sweater has always been a favorite of mine, and I went and looked in the mirror because I just wanted to see what it looked like to be wearing a Red Wing uniform, just for one split second before I got out on the ice.
The Blackhawks jersey, it's almost like the logo that you see more and more on baseball caps everywhere that can almost become like a New York Yankees logo because it's got some sort of pop culture identity, I guess.
And that love affair of Original Six merchandise has helped the 6 teams remain among the leaders in NHL revenue and franchise valuations. Their impact on and off the ice remaining a constant thread.
There's still an inherent allegiance to who you sat and watched hockey with as a kid, whether it was your father or your grandfather.
My dad used to have in our house a pillow that had all the teams with the Original Six on it at a young age. You knew who the Original Six was right away.
That's the bedrock of hockey in North America. The Original Six is what separated that sport from all else. You'd have that table hockey game, and it was the Bruins and the Rangers, or Canadians, or Leafs. Even my daughter go to the movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the How, number 9. It's never gonna go away, and it never should.
Still to come, how unforeseen world events
And throughout the nation, the news is flashed. It's war.
give birth to a glorious era of the National Hockey League.
You know, the Original Six, it's sort of like ground zero. And almost what happened before the Original Six it's ancient history.
Founded in 1917, the National Hockey League was formed with 4 charter members, all from Canada: the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Wanderers, the Ottawa Senators, and the Toronto Hockey Club. By the Roaring '20s, rapid expansion was in the air. The Montreal Maroons were introduced, and new United States-based franchises were added in Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and 2 in New York, the Rangers and the Americans.
With the league's membership now at 10 teams, all of a sudden, the NHL was where it's at.
There were 10 teams in the NHL. So you could have talked about the original 10.
Over the next decade, economic growing pains overwhelmed the new league with contractions and relocations. Ottawa became the St. Louis Eagles, the Pittsburgh Pirates Hockey Club moved to Philadelphia, and the Brooklyn Americans suspended operations after the 1941 season. Hockey, like everything else, could not escape the wrath of the Great Depression.
The economy was just so devastated, at least 3 of the teams, the St. Louis Eagles, the Philadelphia Quakers, and the Montreal Maroons, had to pack their tents. The other issue was the war.
Canada cast her lot with England in the New World War.
Canada joined the war with Britain in September of 1939.
You had a crazy amount of players deciding to step away from the game, making that selfless decision to go and fight for their country and fight for freedom.
There was a shortage of hockey players at that particular time because the league was almost entirely Canadian.
99% of the players were Canadians. The other 1% were from Minnesota or Wisconsin, so they might as well have been Canadians.
With wartime depleted rosters, the NHL played the 1942-43 season with 6 teams. The era of the original 6 was born.
The war changed a lot of things. A lot of guys went overseas. They didn't play. The game wasn't so good. And then they came back, and all of a sudden the game took off.
Every game was sold out. You know, there was excitement all the time, and it was amazing atmosphere.
And that atmosphere was only enhanced by the legendary rinks that the 6 teams called home. Chicago Stadium, the Olympia, Maple Leaf Gardens, Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, and the oldest of the rinks, the Montreal Forum.
When you walk through there, there was certainly history dripping off the walls.
You know what church was? That was Montreal Forum, honestly.
Every night was a great night at the Forum. We knew when we went in there on Saturday that we better be ready to play.
The exit at the Forum was on Atwater Avenue, and after a game, fans would congregate. They didn't want autographs. They wanted answers.
If Montreal was demanding, the Boston Garden was boisterous and downright cramped.
In Boston, in the Garden, when I was a broadcaster, that used to be the only building I used to see could hit by the puck. You were so close.
You know, the conditions were old school. Rats in the locker room. You know, you have to you shake your mask before you went out because there might be a cockroach or two, honestly.
Boston Garden opened up in 1928. 1 year later, the Blackhawks called the new Chicago Stadium their home.
The old Chicago Stadium, they had us housed in the dungeon down below, and you had to take the stairs up.
There were 18 stairs, I think, something like that.
We had those 20-some-odd stairs we have to climb from our locker room up to the ice.
You have to go up 24 steps from the Chicago Stadium.
You had to walk up on skates. I mean, it was nuts.
3/4 of the way up, you're almost on step 21, 22, 23, and now you're hopping on the ice. The place was nuts.
With the Chicago Stadium a complete sellout.
Home ice advantage never meant so much. It was an era of chicken wire above the boards and scoreboard clocks that were difficult to decipher. But they were 6 unique venues, each with charm and personality. Always the best seat in the house, which made for plenty of nights to remember.
In the 1950s, when Montreal was playing Toronto, Toe Blake and Punjimlak were great rivals.
We'll beat them in 6 games.
2 men, strong personalities at the head of each one.
Anyway, predictions are for gypsies.
When it was a 6-team league, it became a 70-game schedule. So do the math. Teams were facing each other 14 times a season.
We played each other 14 times a year. You never had to worry about getting a guy back tonight.
And that sense of familiarity extended off the ice and onto the common mode of transportation for the 6 teams, the train.
We used to take the train to Detroit, and we used to take the train to Chicago right after a Saturday night game.
We would get on the train at midnight and go to bed, and we'd pull into Montreal at 8 o'clock in the morning.
And when you reached your destination, it was time to suit up and renew the war on ice.
It was frequency of battle, and then it was the nature of the battle themselves.
There was no such thing as high-sticking penalties. When these guys got into the corners, I mean, if one guy skated out without blood trailing down his face, it was quite miraculous.
There was the intimidating factor. Like every time I played the Canadians, they would have John Ferguson talking to me and say, "Don't touch the puck, you know, like it's my puck."
The battles were fierce. So were the burgeoning rivalries, including north of the border.
For the longest time, it was the only two teams in Canada. Everyone was either a Maple Leaf fan or a Montreal Canadiens fan.
Toe Blake and Punjim Black were great rivals. I used to say they put on a better show than the players because they were at each other all the time.
And they're jammed in every nook and corner of Maple Leaf Gardens.
The rivalry between Toronto and Montreal was really something, you know.
And no player symbolized that fervor in Canada more than Montreal's right wing, Maurice "Rocket" Richard.
Greatest competitor that ever played from the blue line in.
He hated to lose, and they tell me in the dressing room that he's in there and he wants to be alone in the corner, and he stays there and he concentrates on the game and that he doesn't want to talk to anybody.
Across the blue line, most players might pass. The Rocket shoots. The game is over. The Canadiens win 3-2.
He was the dominant figure. He was the great goal scorer. He was the 50-goal man.
Richard and the Canadiens would win 8 Stanley Cups between 1944 and 1960. But it was a moment in the spring of 1955 that defined the Rockets' cultural importance to the era.
Maurice Richard was struck over the head by Hal Lako of the Bruins. The Rocket, in his absolute seething rage, tried to get loose of a linesman, wound up slugging a linesman. He was suspended for the duration of the regular season and the playoffs by Clarence Campbell, the president then of the National Hockey League.
4 nights later at the Forum, with the NHL president in attendance, the Montreal fans unleashed their anger at Campbell.
The president of the NHL gets food thrown at him, gets a homemade tear gas bomb thrown into the stands in his direction.
Oh, I was at that game. When they had the tear gas bombs, you started to cough and you get teary-eyed.
Suddenly I see a lot of smoke and people running. And it hit me. It was tear gas. And it's well named. I'll tell you, you cry when you get hit by it.
And that touched off what was then famously known, and now it's a proper noun, if you will, the Richard Riot. The building was evacuated. The Canadiens lost the game by forfeit to the Red Wings, and this spilled out into the streets. All hell broke loose.
As the police try to push the fact,
Windows were broken, cars were set ablaze, and it pretty much reduced this city to its knees. That was one of the defining moments, certainly, of hockey and of politics in Quebec.
While the Richard riots were a violent display on the streets of Montreal, it was another number 9 in Detroit who was most feared on the ice. His name was Gordie Howe.
He's the type of guy that you'd want to go to war with. You've got to be in a foxhole, you want to be with Gordie Howe.
The Rocket was the Rocket, and then here comes this young buck, and suddenly he's winning the scoring championships, and he's wearing number 9.
Gordie Howe scores on his blistering backhand shot.
The ability to watch Howe and Richard became easier when a new innovation was introduced in the early 1950s.
Games had been heard on the radio going back to the 30s in Canada, but television changed everything. November 1st, 1952 was the original hockey night in Canada broadcast.
again from coast to coast, it's Hockey Night in Canada.
Everybody didn't have a television set. The furniture stores would put on the television sets right in their windows. People would line up on the streets in front of the furniture stores and they'd watch the game.
It brought families together, it brought communities together. They understood the importance of selling star power.
Bill Hewitt here at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto.
A lot of stars were born in those years. Rocket Richard, Gordie Howe, guys who became seminal figures in the sport.
In the way that New Yorkers once debated who was the greater center fielder, Willie Mays or Mickey Mantle, people in hockey said, well, who's the greater number 9? Who's the better right wing?
If you wanted to win a game, you might want Gordie on your team. If you wanted to fill the rink, you'd want the Rocket.
It was the Great 9 debate. Who do you got? Howe or the Rocket?
By the decade of the 1960s, another number 9 had entered the debate.
There's a new hero on the international sports scene, Bobby Hull, the hockey ace of the Chicago Blackhawks.
If you've ever seen the pictures of him without his shirt on, you'd understand how he could shoot it so hard.
He may pass or shoot, he drives one, score!
You could see the goalies were scared to death at times when he would wind it up, and they'd be up on their haunches and just making sure they didn't catch one right in the kisser.
Hull and his Chicago teammate Stan Mikita introduced the curved stick, changing the game and putting the fear into opposing goaltenders. Remarkably, netminders of the era would challenge offensive players without any type of facial protection.
I just don't know how you play goalie without a mask. I don't know how they did that.
But all that changed on November 1st, 1959, when the Canadiens' Jacques Plante made NHL history, becoming the first goalie to ever don a mask.
I want to slip that on for a minute and let the people see what it looks like with it on. Now, I'm sure all the young ladies in the audience will agree that Jacques looks a lot better without it than he does with it.
Despite the new innovation, Plante and the rest of the league succumbed to Hull and the Blackhawks in 1961.
The Blackhawks are the world champions!
Toronto and Montreal would dominate the remainder of the original six era, keeping Lord Stanley's Cup in Canada for the next 6 seasons. But as the 6-team league was getting ready to say goodbye, a precocious rookie in Boston named Bobby Orr was first saying hello, making his debut on October 19, 1966 against Detroit and Gordie Howe.
I'm watching my pretty pass over my shoulder, and next thing you know, I'm on the ice, and it's Mr. Howe who had hit me.
It was lesson learned for Boston's number 4, but soon enough, Orr revolutionized his position and the sport.
I watched this guy in training camp, and I studied him, especially on the power play. And when he came around the net and took off, I would go back and forth because Bobby, he could beat 3 or 4 guys. But if he ever turned on the steam, I was in trouble.
Orr's style of play changed the game in 1967, but massive change was in the air the following season. A glorious quarter of a century was coming to an end.
They were bringing in 6 new teams to the NHL. I thought it was horrible.
You had your original 6 logo with the beautiful uniforms, and then you had this crazy orange.
It's all over. The Toronto Maple Leafs have won the Stanley Cup.
I remember watching the Toronto Maple Leafs win the '67 Stanley Cup. On TV in our room, the TV was about this big and it was in black and white.
Toronto's championship to end the 1967 season was the last of the original 6 era.
Somebody mentioned once, that, now we're together. Next year's the expansion draft, and the Toronto Maple Leafs did lose a lot of guys in that draft. So basically, this was it.
The NHL was ready to expand.
Owners, managers, coaches, and scouts got together to officially form the 6 new teams, which would double the number of clubs in the NHL.
They were bringing in 6 new teams to the NHL in places like Pittsburgh and Oakland and Los Angeles. I thought it was horrible.
People looked at it and said, it can't work. I mean, we're going to go from 6 to 12.
12 teams would eventually grow into the current-day 30, but the original 6 still hold a special meaning in a modern-day NHL.
Goodness knows we love our Nashville Predators and Tampa Bay Lightning. But on a Saturday night, when the Montreal Canadiens walk into Toronto, or when the Red Wings are playing the Leafs, it's just something different.
I always make a point on game day when Montreal's in town to spend probably a half an hour down in North Station because so many Montreal fans come down and they're all wearing usually the dark red sweater.
The battles of yesteryear remain the battles of today, including what remains the NHL's most passionate rivalry, Boston and Montreal.
Cam Neely going with Corson.
What a hit from McLaren! And this looks scary.
Names change, the faces change, but what doesn't change is it's the Boston Bruins against the Montreal Canadiens.
Traditions once established continue to be cherished.
We always played Friday, Saturday. Friday in Detroit, Saturday in Toronto, and you didn't know which one was going to be hockey game and which one was going to be the war.
Watch Wendell Clark straighten up Bob Probert.
Every game you're seeing the same color jersey, that red jersey, day after day. You learn that's when the rivalries happen.
Heroics displayed in recent times.
Oh, and already down was Campbell. He's shaken up on the play.
Harken back to heroics displayed a half-century ago.
All hockey players, grew up on the legend of Bobby Baun, and that lives on. That's obviously maybe our most famous moment.
Baun, a Maple Leafs defenseman, broke his ankle blocking a shot in Game 6 of the 1964 Stanley Cup, a stretcher carrying him off the ice.
He came up and said, hey, tape this bloody thing up and make it tight enough that I can stand on it and I'll go back out.
His ankle is broken. He doesn't want to hear it. He won't allow them to take x-rays. And he scores the winning goal
He comes back to Bob Bond. He shoots. He scored! Bob Bond shot. Bounced over Sarchuk's shoulder into the corner, and the Maple Leafs have defeated the Detroit Red Wings.
You cling to memories of when things were special. The stories get exaggerated, then they turn into myths, you know. But, I mean, clearly when a guy has a broken leg and then comes back and scores the winning goal, it's a pretty good story.
Bond would play Game 7 2 nights later, broken ankle and all. His spirit and determination a lasting memory of the original six. Almost as lasting as one picture that defines the era.
Montreal-Boston, 52, semifinals.
The fierce rivals had battled for 7 games, but in the third period, Rocket Richard beat Bruins goalie Sugar Jim Henry to give the Canadiens the series win. The two would then meet in the handshake line.
Here was the Rocket with blood coming out. I think Sugar Jim, if he wasn't bleeding, he had been bleeding. They just looked like two battered warriors.
Look at that picture and say, how did he get that black eye? Why does he look so dazed?
Everybody from that era can tell you about Rocket's eyes. And there's Sugar Jim Henry, bent over slightly at the waist, almost in a bow, a sign of deference, a sign of respect. It is the great hockey picture.
They were heroes of the game, a game which has stood the test of time and the inevitable change that has taken place.
The game of hockey has really changed a lot, even throughout my career. But the one thing that has stayed the same is the original six.
Trains have become planes. The quirky barns of yesterday replaced by a standard sheet of ice. Still, 6 teams remain essential by carrying on their legacy and continue to carry the torch of the National Hockey League.
Listen, the NHL is a league now that consists of 30 NHL teams. A big part of that has to do with Jean Beliveau and Johnny Bauer. A lot of these players that played in the original six, I know about the Stanley Cups that they've won, I know their history, I know about their stats, their numbers, the impact they had on the game. And when you think of the original 6 teams, it just represents the NHL and represents hockey. Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, they built this league.